First, we're going to talk about the price. First and second gen, they're selling for about the same amount of money nowadays, so it's going to be a draw. Second, we're going to talk about the looks, because when you look for a bike, car, anything, you want to be able to like the way it looks. Otherwise, there's really no point in buying it. First and second gens, they're pretty different. Second gen is more aerodynamic. First gen is kind of edgy looking. So I can't really pick a winner in the comparison because they're both kind of unique in their own way. So we're going to call it a draw once again. Let's talk about weight next. First gens are roughly 400 pounds wet weight with all the fluids and stuff, and they're one of the lightest 1000cc bikes that you can get. Second gen is roughly around 420 pounds due to the dual exhaust. So in this comparison, first gen gets the win. Okay, next we're going to talk about power. And the engine stayed pretty similar. It's the same 76 millimeter bore and 55 millimeter stroke on both of them. The cylinder head, second gen, they went 1 millimeter smaller intake valves. Camshafts stayed the same, 300 duration for the intake cam and 292 duration for exhaust cam. Identical lift. So power wise, they're about the same. So I'd have to say they're pretty much dead even. Next, we're going to talk about brakes. And brakes on these bikes are pretty much garbage. The front calipers are trash. You just gotta pull them off and throw them in the dumpster. And they're very identical, if not the same. And they're just not safe to have on the bike that is really fast. Gen 2 has a better master cylinder, so you could put upgraded calipers and keep stock factory master cylinder. It'll be a lot better. But for a first gen, you pretty much have to take the calipers and the master cylinder off and replace them. So for that reason, second gen gets 1 and first gen gets 0. Alright, next we're going to talk about gauges. It's really important to have good gauges on a fast bike so you can see what the RPM is, temperature, speedo, all the information. Now, first gen has this gauge cluster. It looks like it came straight out of a GM 1980s truck or a car. I mean, it's a LCD gauge cluster. It belongs in the trash can or maybe on the Geo Metro, but not on the sports bike with 180 horsepower. Second gen has a lot better gauge cluster. You can see everything, and it's just I almost want to give second gen a 2 instead of a 1, and first gen would get a negative 20 just for that. But we're just going to put 1 for second gen, and first gen's going to have to get a 0. Next, we're going to talk about frames. First gen ZX10R has a problem with the frame cracking, and it takes a whole lot of money to get it fixed or to get the frame replaced because it's not covered under warranty. So if you do want to get a first gen ZX10R, I recommend going over it and looking at the frame. Really good when you're buying it, because if you buy a bike with the correct frame, it's going to take a lot of money. Second gen ZX10R doesn't have that problem, so it's easy second gen 1 and first gen big fat 0. Next we're going to talk about string stabilizer, aka damper. This one's fairly easy. Second gens have them, and first gens don't have them from factory, so that's an easy second gen 1 and another 0 for a first gen. Okay, next we're going to talk about charging systems. First gen bikes have generators, and second gen bikes have stators. The difference between those two is that if stator goes out on second gen, then the bike just loses electrical power. Bike dies, get it towed, replace the stator, rectifier, a battery, whichever, and the bike is back to normal. On first gens, when generators go out, most of the time they take the engine out too. So there goes another 1 for a second gen and another 0 for a first gen. Next we're going to talk about lighting. Headlight to be specific. Second generation bikes have projector headlights, so they give you pretty good amount of light at night. First gens don't have them, and they don't give you much light at night, so there's not really a comparison. Second gen gets another 1 and first gen gets a 0. Okay, let's talk about maintenance. To be specific, replacing spark plugs. Second generation bike, it takes about half the time to replace the spark plugs in a first generation. The reason for that is because on the first gen bike you have to remove both mid fairings, and you have to remove both engine mounts so you can remove ignition coils. Otherwise the engine mounts won't let you remove coil number 1 and coil number 4. Second gen bike, you just gotta remove mid fairing, one of them, and you gotta remove engine mount, and then you're able to get all the spark plugs and all the coils out of the way. So for a race bike, you need to replace spark plugs pretty often, or pull them out and see how they're doing, to see if the bike's running rich or lean, to read the plugs. Second gen is a clear winner in this comparison once again. So it's a 1 for a second gen and 0 for a first gen. The last thing I'm going to talk about is part interchange. Since these bikes are becoming 10 years old, finding parts becoming a problem. Having a bike that you can find parts easier for a better price is going to be a lot better than the bike that you can't find parts, period. So let's take second generation bike first. If your engine goes out, you can use an engine from a third generation ZX10R. It pretty much bolts in. You can put all the fuel injection from a second generation bike, and you're pretty much good to go. Front wheels, rear wheels, swing arm, a lot of things from 2008 to 2010 will bolt up to second generation bike. So instead of looking for parts for a bike that was only made for 2 years in 2006 and in 2007 only, now you can look for parts that were made from 2006 to 2010, because those models shared a lot of parts that you can use. Now let's talk about first generation bike. Uh, that bike doesn't share as many parts. Like, let's take front wheel for example. It only fits 2004 and 2005 models. In the second generation bike, the front wheel is identical from 2006 all the way to 2010. So if you hit a pothole, which can happen, and you bend the wheel, then it's going to be a lot easier to find a front wheel for a second generation bike than a first generation bike. So just because of that, second generation bike is going to get one, and first generation bike, the parts are a lot harder to find, so it's going to get a 0. And the final score is 9 for second gen and 4 for first gen.